up, Randies? Stan here, and with the release of Fire Emblem Fates and Pokemon's 20th anniversary, I've been in a very RPG-centric mood lately. And for the sake of wasting time, I won't bore you guys to death with the details, but know that I am very, very thankful for 25,000 subscribers on the RandomTens channel, and as a thank you, I thought I'd make something a little more personal. So here are my top 10 favorite starter Pokemon of all time. At the beginning of every new Pokemon adventure, you're given a choice, and whether you go with fire, water, or grass, for the most part this decision is going to claw, splash, or squirm their way into your heart until your journey comes to a close. These are starter Pokemon, and when it comes to the main series of Pokemon games, it's these types of Pokemon who you form the greatest bonds with. Now, as many of you know, I'm usually the type of YouTuber who makes objective lists, and even though sometimes my opinions slip through, for the most part, when I make a list, I try to keep my own personal opinions and feelings out of it. But today this isn't the case. I'm going to be counting down my personal favorite starter Pokemon from the past 6 generations and trying to put them in order of which had the biggest impact on me. My only real rule is that I can't include more than one starter from each evolutionary line. Other than that, it's my list and I'm not pulling any punches. So without further delay, here are my top 10 favorite starter Pokemon of all time. Number 10. When I originally picked up Pokemon Ruby, I immediately fell in love with all 3 starters. But at the time, like many kids, I opted to go with the fire type, Torchic. As it evolved into a Blaziken, my admiration for this Pokemon only grew, and I was certain I'd made the right choice because let's be serious, who can compete with the pure awesome sauce that is Blaziken? Well, as I discovered during my recent playthrough of Omega Ruby, Sceptile can not only compete, but even surpass. Sceptile is my number 10 choice for one main reason, and that's its design. If Trico is cool, then Sceptile is the straight up Fawns with its earthly color scheme and signature Leaf Blade attack. And yes, I know that Leaf Blade isn't exclusive to the Trico line, but with arms like that it should be. Couple these aesthetics with a 105 base special attack stat and a 120 in base speed, and you have yourself a sleek swordsman who can destroy all your rivals before they can even say the word fire. Also, it must be said that of all the Gen 3 Mega Evolutions, Sceptile's is the best by far, as it gains the dual typing of Dragon. That's right, Sceptile is now technically a dragon, which only adds to its power and coverage options. There are 2 reasons, however, as to why I've placed this one so low on my list, and the first is that, admittedly, Sceptile has a lot of weaknesses and no immunities, which, although is your standard grass-type disadvantage, is made so much worse by the fact that Mega Sceptile actually takes out the obvious fire weakness, but adds in both Dragon and Fairy, as well as makes ice attacks even more super effective in a competitive battle. And finally, the only other reason for it just barely cracking the top 10 is because I only played the Gen 3 remakes a year ago, and simply haven't spent as much time with this starter compared to the others on this list. But I imagine that as I only keep growing as a Pokemon fan, so too will my love of this Hoenn badass. Number 9. From one final evolution right into another. I won't try to build up to this Pokemon because, let's face it, one image says everything you need to know. I think I should state right now that besides the Froakie line, I have never picked a water starter for any of my Pokemon playthroughs. It's not that they're bad. In fact, as you'll eventually see on this list, there's many water lines that eventually won me over as I grew up, and this is most definitely one of them. Feraligatr actually has the exact same base stat total as both Sceptile and Blaziken, but unlike those Gen 3 attackers, Feraligatr is much more balanced. Yes, it doesn't have a Mega Evolution, yet, but it more than makes up for it with only having the standard grass and electric weaknesses that accompany your typical water type, and having one of the most diverse pools of TM moves of any starter. In fact, of the 18 different Pokemon types, Feraligatr can learn moves that span 11 of these types, and more importantly can learn specific moves like Dig and Ice Beam that render its weaknesses as far less potent. The fact is, with an aggressive design and being the ultimate crocodile in adaptability, this Pokemon is almost perfect for any situation the game can throw at you, and that's good enough for the number 9 spot. Number 8. Look, I'll be perfectly upfront about this with you guys. You're not going to see many middle evolution starter Pokemon on this list. It's not that I hate them, in fact, many of them are great additions to any team, but let's be clear, middle evolutions in general get a raw deal every time. These Pokemon work so hard, but they're always overshadowed by their more adorable pre-evolutions or more powerful final forms. However, once in a while you get a very rare exception, and in my number 8 spot, that exception is Monferno. As I've already stated, as a kid, I loved fire-type starters, and so when I picked up Pokemon Diamond, it didn't matter what the other two looked like. I already knew that Chimchar was the one for me. And Chimchar was great, and my eventual Infernape pretty much took on the Elite Four single-handedly thanks to my childlike approach to battles. But through it all, the Pokemon I remembered the most from that playthrough was Monferno. I think this could honestly be because with its dual firefighting typing, I was able to plow through Gen 4's Gardenia and Maylene with no sweat. But then came the 4th gym leader, Crasher Wake, who has some really annoying water-type Pokemon. And at that point, the only truly viable Pokemon I had in my party was Monferno, because again, I was a kid and I played the let's overlevel my starter and not catch any other Pokemon game. This meant that I had to fight that friggin' Gyarados over 30 times before I finally leveled up to Infernape and claimed the Fen badge. The thing is, I don't remember the actual victory with Infernape, but rather the incredible struggle that my Monferno and I went through just to move along in the game. After that, the rest of the playthrough was pretty much a breeze with my overleveled firefighting Monkey Man, but I'll always remember the struggles we had when he was just an adorable Monferno. Number 7. Before I continue with this list, I have one crazy important question for you. Do you like Mudkips? Sorry Blaziken fans, but like a ton of people out there, my favorite Hoenn starter is the cuddly water type. So why Mudkip and not Swampert, its final evolution? Well, to be honest, Swampert, although extremely good, was just never for me, and in terms of final evolutions of the Hoenn starters, it's actually my least favorite of the tropical bunch. But there's just something instantly appealing about Mudkip and its classic blue and orange color scheme that works for me. The Mudfish Pokemon isn't a powerhouse, and honestly, I can't even really explain why I like it so much, which is admittedly a pretty shallow choice. I suppose maybe it's because of the meme, but either way, this is just simply one of my favorite designs of the entire Pokemon series, and on an aesthetic level, I think it's everything that a starter should be. So congrats Mudkip on your number 7 spot on the list. You're not as badass as Sceptile, and not as important to me as Monferno, but hey, you've got an incredible design and an even greater legacy, and I guess even I can't ignore all that. Number 6. After a certain video I made back in July of last year, I've heard this Pokemon's name almost every single day since. I think many of you feel that I was just simply hating on this Pokemon because it's the popular thing to do. But the fact is that no matter how overrated this Pokemon poster boy gets, I will never ever hate it. You know why? Because Charizard is and will always be my favorite Gen 1 starter. I mean, how could this fire-flying type ever not make the list of any kid who grew up during Pokemon's world domination? It was the most valuable card, Ash's secret weapon in the show, and my absolute number 1 Pokemon in my only playthrough of Fire Red. In fact, I literally bought Pokemon X over Y because I saw the Pokemon Origins anime and immediately fell in love with the design for Mega Charizard X. So yeah, all of you people out there who think I'm way too hard on this fire-breathing beauty need to calm down because, frankly, I love Charizard. From its design, to its legacy, to the fact that it's easily one of the most competitively viable starters, with both Mega Evolutions having a 634 base stat total, and Charizard Y's frankly insane special attack. This is literally the Pokemon of champions, and yes, because it's so popular, many fans of the series, myself included, will occasionally rag on it. But in my case at least, it's always out of curiosity and never from a malicious place. Also, to like 95% of the 12-year-olds who commented on that video, Charizard is a lizard, not a dragon, save for one of his Mega Evolutions, and to be honest, because of how that fact still eludes so many players, I think that makes him all the more worthy of this spot. Number 5. As I mentioned in my number 7 spot, the middle stage of any Pokemon's evolution usually can't compete with its first and last, with the perfect example being the internet's favorite Gen 6 punching bag, Quilladin. Personally, I don't hate this design at all, but I understand why in a line that starts with this bundle of awesome and ends with this epic monster that it does sort of fall short. So what's an example of a starter Pokemon's middle evolution done perfectly? Enter Bayleaf. Based on the sauropod dinosaur family, this evolutionary lineup in general is so simple in its design, but also extremely memorable. I'll admit that putting Bayleaf on this list is probably a symptom of my love for the one Ash had during his Johto journey, but Bayleaf is so much more than that. The scent that this Pokemon emanates from the leaves on its neck is basically a super drug that has a positive effect on all of those around it. Along with its winning and cheerful demeanor, this also makes Bayleaf the ultimate pick-me-up when you're feeling down. Something I think many of us Nintendo fans could have used through some hard times when our interests were made fun of or put down from those who thought we were lame. Either way, I absolutely adore not only the way this Pokemon is so simply designed, but also everything it represents, and for that, and being the ultimate travel companion, Bayleaf earns its spot. Number 4. I like Dark-type Pokemon. In fact, I would go as far as to say that Dark-type may be my favorite in the entire series. I mean, some of my favorite Pokemon of all time, including Umbreon and Houndoom, are Dark-types, and let's not forget about everyone's favorite Gen 4 Legendary. So you can imagine my excitement when I beat Lysander for the first time and my Frogadier evolved into the dual-typed Greninja. Now, I know at this point Greninja has become like the Gen 6 equivalent of Charizard, but before the character was announced for Smash, or before I had any idea that this covert ninja was hiding the OP ability Protein in its bag of tricks, I'd already done 2 playthroughs with Greninja, and I loved every single battle. With a base speed stat of 122, this ninja Pokemon lives up to its namesake, and is an absolute blast to battle with. On top of that, as I've previously stated, Shiny Greninja is one of my top 10 favorite shiny Pokemon of all time, and I'm the type of guy who weirdly puts a lot of stock in a Pokemon's shiny design. But more than anything, Greninja just stands out amongst its entire generation, and finally gave us a lightning-fast water-type Pokemon with personality in a world where water starters are usually designed with defense in mind. And that's why this Pokemon is so important to me. I love battling with speed and fury, and Greninja offers players a fun and charismatic way to play with both. And for those reasons, and being one of the most versatile Pokemon I've ever had the pleasure of using in a battle, Greninja will always be my personal favorite water-type starter. Number 3. Throughout Pokemon's now 20 years of incredible gaming experiences, I've had the pleasure of being exposed to plenty of sassy Pokemon. From Ash's Charmeleon to Trico himself, there have been a few instances where a smug personality or design can eventually wear thin. But with this next entry, it never seems to get old. In fact, Snivy's attitude is so massive that it's the only Generation 5 Pokemon on this entire list, and in a pretty high spot to boot. But in all seriousness, Snivy makes it so high on this countdown for 2 reasons. Number 1 is the aforementioned smugness that accompanies this Pokemon everywhere it goes. When everyone was gushing over how cute Ash's Oshawott was, I couldn't help but grow attached to Trip's bratty Snivy. I have a feeling this could be because at the time of Gen 5's release, I was right in the middle of my angsty teenage years, and in many ways I was like Snivy to a T. However, the second and most important reason Snivy makes it so high on this list is because, in my mind, he was so appealing as a starter when compared to his Unova counterparts that I actually broke tradition and opted not to go with a fire starter for the first time since I was 7. We are talking through Pokemon Silver, Ruby, Diamond, Fire Red, and Soul Silver. Every single starter Pokemon I chose was that region's fire type, and it was finally this moody green snake that helped me see the light. Without Snivy, I wouldn't know how cool Sceptile was, and I wouldn't have even thought about Froakie when I finally got my hands on Gen 6, and as a Pokemon player who admittedly gets stuck in his nostalgia a little too much sometimes, Snivy was the refreshing cleanser I needed to help me get over my Gen 2 pseudo-elitism. So in a weird way, Snivy's smugness saved me from my own, and whenever I look back on Gen 5, I always think fondly of this green little jerk. Number 2. Perhaps I'm a weirdo, or perhaps I'm a hipster, but the runner-up pick isn't a very popular Pokemon. It's not hated on like Quilladin, but it's certainly not the immediate choice for best starter Pokemon. In fact, like the shy girl in school, I never noticed how beautiful this Pokemon was until after a few years had gone by, and I'd grown up a little more. And that, my friends, is a way over-the-top simile on why I think Torterra is such an amazing Pokemon. First off, that design is one of my favorites in the entire series. I'm not kidding. Before even getting into the meat of it all, just as a cosmetic thing, the coloring of this grass-ground Pokemon is so much better suited than that lime green color Pokemon has a habit of forcing upon its grass starters. You couple that with the fact that Torterra's back is like a walking nature preserve that smaller Pokemon make nests in, and you can understand why this creature is known as the continent Pokemon. Now, most people assume that Torterra is simply a wall, a defensive beast that's only good for slowly sapping an opponent's strength, similarly to Ferrothorn, but they're so wrong. And side note, Ferrothorn is probably my favorite defensive Pokemon ever, but that's a whole different topic for another video. Anyways, the truth is that Torterra is an equal opportunity offending Pokemon, as its base attack stat is almost as high as its defense stat, with both being very good for a final form starter Pokemon. I finally got to use one in a recent playthrough of Pokemon Platinum, and I've gotta say that if you put a Shell Bell or leftovers on this monster, then prepare to conquer any opponent that gets in your way. So although it may not be as impactful to me as my number 1 or even number 3 picks, Torterra gets so much love because not only is it probably my all-time favorite starter Pokemon design, but it's also a solid pick for any serious team as well, with its dual typing and great stats. Although for some reason, I always thought it looked identical to Ankylomon from the Digimon sequel series. No? Just me? Alright, well then let's move on and end this baby. Number 1. Pokemon is the type of story that can oftentimes feel like wish fulfillment. We all want to be a champion of something. We all want to make a difference or save the world. And I think more than anything, we all want to know that as we grow up, we'll always have our best friend by our side. In the case of Pokemon, starters become like those best friends. The one companion that's beside you throughout your journey, through your ups and your downs, and through your growth as a person and as a trainer. And that's why I think that no matter who you are or whichever generation's your favorite, anybody who's ever played a Pokemon game at a young age will always have a special connection to their first starter. And for me, that companion is Cyndaquil. I don't think that Cyndaquil is the toughest or even the cutest Pokemon, and I don't even think it's the overall best starter Game Freak's ever designed, but this Pokemon is important to me. I struggled for the longest time whether to give this spot to Cyndaquil or its final evolution Typhlosion, but in the end I remembered something I did as a kid that made this decision easy for me. When I got past the second gym leader in Pokemon Silver, my Cyndaquil began evolving, and instead of letting it grow more powerful, I hit B. In fact, I hit B every single time it would level up from then until Cianwood City, because in all honesty, I didn't want my partner Pokemon to change. It had taken me 2 days to get to that point, and in my 7-year-old mind, I'd spent so much time learning and having fun with this one specific creature that I didn't want it to leave me behind. I know today this sounds stupid, and yes, eventually I let it evolve into Quilava so that I could beat Chuck, but to this day, I have still yet to press B purposely on any other Pokemon for reasons like this. I think now looking back, I did this because about a month before I received the game as a gift, I found out that my family was going to be moving. This would mean a new school and a new neighborhood, but most importantly to me, it meant saying goodbye to old friends, and so in a time when everything was changing around me and I had no power to stop it, I could hit B and continue to see my friend for as long as I wanted. And for that extremely sappy reason, and because Cyndaquil was the first Pokemon that I ever called my own, you better believe it's my favorite starter Pokemon ever.